Hello, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Yeah, you get that good afternoon back, don't you? Well, Greg and I were saying on the way, just as we were starting up here, we said, well, how are we going to start this out? We've gotten accustomed to it, and I was saying it's sort of like those guys on Car Talk. You know, after 30 years of it, they've gotten used to talking to each other about the same stuff, and they're brothers too. But Greg did suggest, you know, I routinely give him credit for the idea, and remembering that ideas are the DNA of everything that's important. And actually, he has the opportunity to really give me some grief over. So I'm going to let him tell the story of about a little over a year ago.
Okay, how all this cooperation started in the Bluegrass region. A couple of things behind it. One of the things that's always kind of bothered me a little bit about our state is we need to be working better together in terms of making the pie bigger. You know, we're a small state, so if you're a small company, what you've got to be really great at is being close to the customer, teamwork, flexibility, so you outwork the big guy, right? So as a state, we got to have that as more part of our DNA. So that was kind of a background, and as I was elected, then I started thinking about planning. You know, what's the strategic plan look for the city? What's Louisville going to be like in 10 years? And I went to a seminar put on by the Brookings Institution, and they started talking about the trend toward regional planning that's taken place across the country, across the world, regional economic development planning. So naturally that would think, okay, partnership planning, how about Lexington? My friend Jim Gray had just been elected as the mayor of Lexington, and Jim and I knew each other in our private lives and collaborated with each other on some private sector activity. So I said, I'm going to talk to Mayor Gray about this and see what he has to say. So I waited until an opportune moment, which was the U of L versus UK basketball game in the new Yum Center. And we were sitting there together. I said, Jim, you know, we really need to be role models for the rest of the state here and talk about cooperation and how we can have a lot more to gain by working together than we do apart. We can sell ourselves as a region of 2.5 million people when you talk about the whole central Kentucky region. And when large investments are being considered around the world right now, they're looking for scale, right? Louisville's metro area is about 1.3 million, Lexington's about 500,000, good-sized cities by themselves, but we got to compete with Atlanta, Chicago, LA, so let's get some scale to this thing. What do you think?
And I thought, surely he will get over this idea. But by the end of that ball game, Greg, with that salesman's persuasiveness that he has, it was very compelling. And then we picked it up, and in February of last year, we both went to Washington and met with the Brookings folks, led by Bruce Katz, who is their senior vice president, I think, and senior economist for Brookings. And Bruce had just come back from China, from Germany, and he was describing some of the same things that I'd been hearing from friends of mine, including my brother in our family business, when he was coming back from Europe and especially from Germany, and describing the strength of the German economy and the ways in which the public sector and the private sector were working together. And so these themes were connecting, you know, real clearly between what is going on in Europe and the struggles that we've got here in America. And I think Bruce described it. He said, you know, there's gridlock in Washington. That's unlikely to change. A lot of our states are strapped, and it's really going to become the responsibility of cities to really pull themselves up from the bootstraps. That was really the compelling theme, and fortunately, Brookings had developed a template, a working template for just this work, and it's called the Brookings Metropolitan Initiative. Isn't that it?
That's right. So we coined our effort BEAM, Bluegrass Economic Advancement Movement. And when you think about some of the challenges that we're having as a country right now, you know, my friends in the business community, and I'm a business guy that just happens to be mayor right now, but, you know, people just say, let's get some certainty so that we can figure out the road ahead. Certainty on tax policy, certainty on health insurance coverage. That's still being debated despite the Supreme Court's rule. And then also on the debt and deficit, how are we going to deal with those things so we can grow? So how do we get Washington reinvigorated? And how about our state houses as well? We see a lot of this being played out around the state houses as well, a lot of paralysis. So the mayors, of course, would say, we're going to take care of our own backyards before we complain about anybody else and grow it from the city level on up.
Yeah, and I think, Greg, one of the out of the gate questions for us was, so when you've got such a broad composition, such a broad canvas to work on, what do you focus on? And Brookings was very helpful out of the gate, and Margaret Handmaker, who has been right there with us in the operational role. Margaret, hold your hand up so everybody can see you. Talk about you in just a minute. Margaret's been behind the operational arm and energy and intellectual horsepower, working with Jim Host all along the way, and us. But right out of the gate, Brookings said, what's the real center of gravity here? What's your competitive advantage? And looking between the two cities in our metropolitan regions, advanced manufacturing, almost 100,000 jobs. A big component of that, a big piece of that is automotive. Ford in Louisville, Toyota in Lexington. So when the question was asked, why not, for example, a big lens on Michael Karpf is here, Dr. Karpf, Executive Vice President, University of Kentucky's Chandler Medical Center, would be the first to say, healthcare is, of course, a big component, a big driver in our economy. What Brookings said to us was every major city, Louisville, Lexington, all around us, all over the country, healthcare is centerpiece. But what is it that makes you special? What is it that provides competitive advantage and the opportunity to really lift up? And it happened, I think, Greg, you'll say, that at the same time we were examining this, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, the country was still struggling really in terms of resurrecting the notion that manufacturing could be done in the United States, and it would provide long-term competitive opportunities for us.
So all this is about, that's our value proposition then. We thought we're competitively unique with advanced manufacturing, and then you got to set the tone, right? How can we be the best in the world at productivity, at quality, and safety? That's the only way that we can guarantee any jobs. It's not going to be a tax policy. It's not going to be any set-aside. At the end of the day, it comes down to we've got to be better than anybody else in the world. So that's the guiding mantra of the Advanced Manufacturing Initiative with Bluegrass as well. So we are now probably 6 months or so into the program, have discovered quite a few things, or maybe relearned quite a few things. And we have initiatives taking place in governance, human capital, and innovation. But like when you go to any place and you see cities that are vibrant, you see good percentages of higher paying jobs. The challenge that we have in our advanced manufacturing sector here is that we've got lots of assembly jobs. And assembly jobs are not bad paying jobs. Although now with the two-tier wage structure with the UAW, they're not as good paying as what they used to be before. So all of these initiatives, we say, how can we move up that value chain so that we've got the research jobs here, we've got the back office jobs as well, so the $80,000 to $250,000 a year jobs as well. And this is a critical initiative for our state, and you'd say, well, why don't we have them now? It goes back to the same answer that we get for almost every question that's asked, and that's education. We don't have the percentage of adults that we need in this state that have college degrees, master's degrees, research degrees, engineering specialists, et cetera. So we're addressing the semi-skilled manufacturing assembly worker gap with the Kentucky Community and Technical Colleges. And then we're working with U of L and UK. Actually, their engineering schools are doing a joint strategic plan together to figure out how they can support the BEAM initiative. So there's a lot of good that's coming out of this for this same being. And when you look at some of these stats, folks, this is the kind of thing where we're just not going to incrementally improve our way out of this. The world is changing so fast. As Kentuckians or Louisvillians or Lexingtonians, we got to say we got to do something radically different because the world's not stopping for us. And as we all know, the world is globalizing. And so we can't sit out of a global economy as well. So how do we ramp up these education rates? How do we ramp up our rate of engineers? 1.14% of the country's workforce is in engineering. 0.77% of Kentucky's is. So we're like 50% behind. 50%, huge number. You know, that means less intellectual property, less patents associated with that, less creativity. So how do we produce more engineers in our state? It needs to be a governor initiative. U of L and UK obviously need to embrace that. They're in the process of doing that. There's different types of degrees that we can get for engineering that we don't have now for folks that just want to go into industry. That's part of this idea as well. But the main point I want to get across here is it's not about getting a little better. We got to think of things that are radically different to move Kentucky from 35th to 45th into the top quartile of American states. So when you're talking with your public policy folks and you're part of that leadership effort, blow some people's minds with breakthrough initiatives, innovation initiatives. And when you have people saying, well, we can't do that, then maybe we're on to something, because we've got to get into that level of improvement for us to move into the top tier.
You know, one of the things that Greg was just mentioned was the subcommittee on human capital. Greg was just talking about the deficit that we have at the higher education level in higher skills engineers. We also discovered through the research phase that we've been in with Brookings, we discovered that here we are in a state with 8% unemployment, but many of our manufacturers are telling us that they cannot hire a qualified workforce. Now, we were discovering this anecdotally, and, you know, guess what? Not unexpectedly, these are the same symptoms that we're hearing across the country. But what is it that we are saying that we can do differently? Well, what we can do differently is we can recognize that we've got the problem and we can actually attack it. And that's what, in many respects, that's what this has been about. It's been a convening effort. So who do we have around the Beam board table? Well, we've got the two major university presidents, and we've got Mike McCall, the president of KCTC. So through this project, through this initiative, we've illuminated these issues with the notion that, with the idea to pick up on the competitive advantage opportunity that we have, that we'll get to addressing it more intentionally. One of the sort of the aha moments in this was a meeting that we held 2.5 months ago, I think about 8 weeks ago now, 10 weeks ago at Toyota. Toyota has created almost 8 years ago now a partnership with Bluegrass Community and Technical College to create an apprenticeship, the equivalent of a training and apprenticeship program for skilled trades. Now, that may not sound that imaginative or innovative out of the gate, but when you hear the presentation from Toyota, what you hear is that from Will James, the president, some of you all know Will, he will say, Toyota identified this emerging skills deficit gap 10 years ago. We knew that our folks were retiring, that the skill sets they had, we were not finding them in the workforce. We had to do something about it. They went to BCTC, they created the project, the program, and today there is a national program called Project Lead the Way, which is in some of the schools. It's here in Louisville. Lexington actually had a site, and we abandoned the site. We're now looking at picking it back up. But what is it that the president of Project Lead the Way said? He said that this model is the best in the country, this model with Toyota. One of the takeaways from that was behavioral. What is it Toyota said that they had to recognizing right out of the gate? That there is a perception that manufacturing jobs are unrewarding jobs. So in many respects, it is a matter, and I think probably everybody in this room will recognize that, that kids are today encouraged that there's really one track, go all the way through a university. Okay, our systems, our reward systems for high school are engaged that way. So in many respects, dealing with these issues as it relates to advanced manufacturing has to do with adjusting and changing, adapting behaviors.
Well, let's talk about preparation for the workforce. One of our major programs we've got going on in Louisville is called 55,000 Degrees, getting 55,000 more college degrees in the community by the year 2020. And when we achieve that, we'll have 50% of our adults with college education. That'll put us in the top quartile of American cities with an educated workforce, drives innovation, job growth, et cetera. But what we're seeing with BEAM and all of our other initiatives, it's not just the quantity of degrees, it's the quality or the type of degrees that we have. You know, we talk a lot about the unemployment percentages in America right now, but we have 3 million open jobs because there's not the right match between those job openings and the skills. Right now in Louisville, we have 400 openings for software developers, code developers, and database management, web services, et cetera. So a private company called Catalyst Learning approached Ted Smith, who runs our economic growth and innovation, and said, what can we do about this? We work with JCTC to create a program with them. We find private sponsors in the business community to sponsor a student for $1,500. There's an internship component with that student that goes to work with the company, and then they'll have a qualified worker at the end of that cycle. We're seeing most progress, public-private partners like that. Government can't do anything. I think you all believe that. But we need the private sector to step up and say, how can we help as well? And then one other thing, let's talk about this before Bill comes up here, is this whole export initiative as well. You know, globalization's upon us. We talked about that a little bit. If you have a company and you have competitors outside of this country and you're not a global company, more than likely you're not going to be sitting here 5 or 10 years from now because of the way the world is shrinking. Interestingly, Kentucky ranks 11th in the United States for exports per capita. So that's an area where we are leading part of this country as well. So for a small state, a non-coastal state, we do really well. And most of those exports are coming from small and medium-sized companies. However, most of those companies are just exporting to 1 or 2 companies. They're not truly global. So one of our initiatives, one of our goals for BEAM is to expand the number of companies that are exporting by 50% over the next 5 years. So not only is that good for business, it's good for the global mindset that we need to adapt here in Kentucky as well.
And I think in this afternoon's program, I noticed, or the agenda, or tomorrow, you're going to be hearing from our own Dr. Pierce Lyons. Pierce is here. Hold up your hand, Pierce, or have you escaped the room? You're here somewhere, perhaps.
He's probably out working on it.
He's working on it. There we go. Done just an extraordinary job in 25 years of creating a global brand. So a great example for us. I think, the numbers that Greg mentioned do reinforce that Kentucky has done some good things. Lexington, in fact, this is one of the benefits of this project. We actually identify numbers, we identify analytics, data that we didn't know about before. Lexington's, as a percentage of our GDP, of our gross metropolitan product, we are generating 15% in exports. And Louisville is at 11. We're both above the national average. The state is, as Greg said, but in the last few years, we have been below the national average in growth. So, opportunity, good opportunity here.
And Lexington is also one of the most educated cities in the country in terms, again, of percentage of adults with college education. So we're lower here in Louisville, given our manufacturing background, and that's where the 55,000 Degrees program comes on. So, Bill, one last thing before we give it to you. I see that the topic of this program is, can Louisville and Lexington compete with American cities, right? Wrong question. Can Louisville and Lexington compete with global cities? It's much bigger than the United States that we're talking about right now. And I know many of y'all have to feel that in your business as well. And so that is the constant theme that we're talking about here in Louisville. We're not going to be the biggest city in the world, but we should be the best at whatever we do. And we focus in on our economic development initiatives. You've heard one, advanced manufacturing. The other one is lifelong wellness and aging care. We have more companies headquartered in Louisville in that space than any city in the world, which is a rapidly growing area, obviously, given the demographics of the world. Value-added logistics is the third. area. You can think about that. We've got UPS's Global Air Hub here. So there's a business that starts every 2 weeks just because they want to be next to that Global Air Hub. And then our fourth sector is one that's dear to all Kentuckians, and that's the food and beverage segment, and we include bourbon as one of those major categories.